Hello, my name is Les Wicker, and we are in the, I believe, 17th episode now of Three Things You Must Understand. And I've been enjoying this process, and I hope you have. What we're doing here, and I'll try not to make too long an introduction like I probably did too long last time, but what I'm trying to do here is expose some widely held ideas and concepts as myths, because they are. And among those myths that we have begun with was the idea that we came from nothing, or that we evolved from slimy algae by blind chance, that we came from monkeys and we human beings are simply a higher form of monkey. I reject that absolutely, 100% reject it. We are not a higher form of monkey, but we were created in the image of God. Now, I'm sure you've heard that all before, but what we tried to do in the first number of programs is show the evidence, scientific evidence, that supports so solidly creation. And so the first of the three things you must understand, and there have been some other things that we had to understand in the course of understanding these things, but the first one was evolution is the biggest lie that's ever been swallowed by mankind. And we spend quite a bit of time on that, but I will just note regarding that particular proposition that we read last time in the course of our sort of beginning to teach the gospel of Christ, Isaiah 1 and verse 3, where it says that an ox knows his owner, and an ass or donkey knows his master's crib or his feeding trough, but Israel doth not know. And what the Lord was saying there through Isaiah applies, and it was an insult, really. I mean, because he's comparing his people to an ox or a donkey who both know where their food is coming from and who their owner is. But my people, Israel, he says, they don't know who their owner is. They don't know where their food is coming from. And if you are an evolutionist out there, the same would apply to you. You don't know who your owner is, you don't know who your maker is, and you don't know where your food is coming from, because it all comes from God. And so anyway, that's one of the points that we might want to make. The second of those, and we're now approaching the third one now, but the second of those was God does not approve of any divisions among those who would be called Christian. And the myth that we are trying to expose there is the idea that in this country there is this system of denominationalism that is characteristic of the form of religion in this country. And I am saying, the Bible is saying, that there is nothing like that in the Bible. There is no system of groups of churches. There is nothing smaller than or greater than the local church. And except perhaps the universal church is spoken of in a general sense. Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church. He wasn't speaking of a particular local church like the church at Ephesus or the church of Corinth or the church at Laodicea or Thyatira. He was speaking of the church worldwide in a universal way. But those are things that we had talked about, and the idea of unity from John 17, from 1 Corinthians 1, from Ephesians 4, and many others. We talked about it in great length, so I'm not going to go back over those, but that was the second of those things, that God does not approve of any divisions among those who would be called Christians. Now, today I want to continue in the text that we had begun last time, and really what we're doing is we're partly establishing through then a very brief review of some Old Testament prophecies and how they how are shown in the days of Christ and through the words of Christ that He is the fulfillment of all those Old Testament prophecies. And in the course of this also setting forth some very fundamental things to understand that we read from Deuteronomy 30, how that God said through Moses, He said, choose, they say, I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. And He said there, choose, therefore choose life, that you may dwell in the land, that you may be blessed, and all those things that we read. That's Deuteronomy 30. And that's a fundamental concept that we can clearly see in the Old and the New Testament. Now, we're about ready to begin into some new material here. So I'm going to be, as I said before, I'm wanting at this point for me to talk a little bit less as far as a commentary on things and read a little bit more so that the Bible can speak for itself. And that's really what we're heading for. That's what we've been wanting to do. And even though you may think, well, it's kind of boring to just sit there and listen to someone read. Well, I'm not a stand-up comedian. This isn't intended to be just entertainment. I know people, they have their remote control and they're clicking off the channels and finding something worthwhile to watch, I hope, or maybe entertaining, no matter what it is. But if you're looking for a stand-up comedian or something just to entertain, well, that's not this program. The subject matters that we're looking at are rather serious. And there's plenty of other people out there to entertain you, but that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do here is inform you. I want you to know what God has revealed to us through His Holy Word. And so it requires some time. It requires some patience. But these things can be known. And we've been establishing that fact a number of times. How that Paul said in Ephesians 3 and verse 4, when you read, the Apostle Paul said, you may understand the mystery that had afore been written in a few words. And when you read it, you can understand my knowledge in the mystery, the Apostle Paul said. An apostle that was inspired by the Holy Spirit to know God's words and His will. So that's what we're doing tonight. Now, down in verse, let's see here. I don't remember the exact context of John. I know where it is. John chapter 12, and down in verse 42 and 43. The record will kind of catch up a little bit, but I'm trying to set forth the fundamental gospel of Christ in the next few minutes, and that's what we did a good part of the last time we were together, and so I'm continuing that basic content again. But down in verse 42 and 43 of John 12, the record says there, nevertheless, even among the rulers, many believed in Him, but because of the Pharisees they did not confess Him, lest they should be put out of the synagogue. For they loved the praise of men more than the praise of God. Never did any of His critics, Jesus' critics, ever say, you didn't do those miracles. In fact, back in chapter 11 of John, where Jesus raises Lazarus to life after having been dead for 4 days, notice the reaction of the Pharisees and the chief priests to Him, to this undeniable miracle. There in verses 47 and 48 says, then the chief priest and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs. If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. Verse 53 through 57 says this, Then from that day on, they plotted to put him to death. Therefore, Jesus no longer walked openly among the Jews, but went from then into the country near the wilderness to a city called Ephraim, and there remained with his disciples. And the Passover of the Jews was near, and many went from the country up to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. Then they sought Jesus and spoke among themselves, and as they stood in the temple, What do you think? That he will not come to the feast? Now both the chief priests and the Pharisees had given a command that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it, that they might seize him. Now, did you catch that? Let me kind of recite what we just did or read there. These religious leaders were purifying themselves to partake of the Passover, while at the same time plotting to kill their own Messiah because he threatened their prominence and power. Did anyone deny or discredit the miracle? No. In chapter 12 and verse 10, the chief priests took counsel that they might also put Lazarus to death, because on account of him, Lazarus, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. You see, they couldn't stand for a dead man to be walking around telling about how Jesus brought him back to life. That evidence was just too compelling. We have got to destroy the evidence. Lazarus needs to be back in the grave where he belongs. Now you can read all about this for yourself if you haven't, but you can see how that the hatred for Jesus began to build. They could not stand having someone so pure walking among them, because he made their wickedness obvious and made this public, religiosity look like what it was, an empty show. Well, let's fast forward toward the end of Jesus' life on earth, when this hating crowd seized an opportunity of one of his disciples, Judas, who had been with him on that, the dusty preaching trail for years, knew he was innocent, but he loved money, and he betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He later tried to give back the money, telling the chief priest that he had betrayed innocent blood. Now, that night of the betrayal, after Jesus had eaten the Passover meal with his apostles, they went out to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus prayed to the Father. He said, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." And after praying alone 3 times while his apostles slept, the quietness of the garden was disturbed by the rattling and clamor of about 600 Roman soldiers, armed and ready for battle with torches and spears and swords. Along with the religious leaders of the day, Judas Iscariot leading the pack, all to take one man. So just imagine that. But guess what? It wasn't enough. The high priest, emboldened by the multitude of Roman power, of which at any other time they disdained to the core, but not as much as they hated Jesus. Well, things did not go that night. They did not happen as they thought. Because rather than Jesus fleeing into the bushes or hiding behind some rocks in the Garden of Gethsemane as this great multitude approached, Jesus went forward to confront them, all. And he asked, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he said, "I am he." Do you know what happened next? When Jesus said, "I am he," incidentally, in that verse, the word "he" was supplied by the translators. What he actually said from the Greek was, "I am." When he was asked, "Who are you looking for?" He said, "I am." But at the force of Jesus' words, "I am," they all went backward and fell to the ground. John 18:6. Just read it for yourself if you've never heard that before. They all went backward and fell, all of them. The soldiers, the high priest, everybody. They fell to the ground at that word of Jesus when he said, "I am." Just imagine then the chief priest and the hundreds of soldiers getting up off the ground, dusting off their priestly robes, the soldiers straightening their swords, struggling with their armor as they arose, and Jesus, still standing, asked once again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." Then Peter, no doubt thinking that he would somehow save the Lord, drew out his sword and thinking this was the moment to fight. But being a fisherman and not a soldier, he manages only to cut off the right ear of the high priest's servant. His name was Malchus. And Jesus, standing still, tells Peter to put his sword back into its sheath. "Shall I not drink the cup my Father has given me to drink?" And Peter's boldness instantly evaporates. Jesus calmly restores Malchus's ear back on his head and informs Peter that he could pray to the Father. Jesus could. He could pray to the Father, and he would immediately send more than 12 legions of angels. Now that's over 72,000 angels. And remember that one angel in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, killed 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. 72,000 angels could wipe out the entire human population in short order. But this is what you need to understand. God is not trying to kill us. God is not trying to destroy us. The point is that you can see that these 600 Roman soldiers with spears and swords were not enough to take Jesus. You see, mere humans cannot and could not have killed this man, and there was never any possibility that they could, except he give himself to them. In John 10, he gave himself to them, and he gave himself to us. Therefore, it says in John 10, "My Father loves me because I lay down my life that I might take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself." I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it up again. Now, that's verses 17 and 18 of John 10. So, they arrest him there in the garden. They bind him and lead him into the city. His disciples all flee into the night for fear. Awaiting him in the city were the judges, which have been bribed and these judges have paid in bribes false witnesses, but none of them agreed. And of course, being late at night, there were no witnesses for the defense, like Lazarus, who was raised from the dead, and innumerable others who had been healed by him and seen his miracles. couldn't the man born blind have given a convincing testimony in the defense of Jesus? You see, but Jesus didn't ask for any of the chief priests of the elders. He didn't ask for anything in defense of his position. He wasn't given a lawyer. But they weren't interested in finding the truth. The high priest say in a mock trial, I adjure you by the living God, he says to Jesus, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, it is as you say. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming in the clouds of heaven. That's Matthew 26, 63 and 64. Then Caiaphas, the high priest, rends his garment on the stage of his court in the wee hours of the morning. Blasphemy, they call it. And it would have been for anyone else other than Jesus to have said the things that he said. It would have been blasphemy. But no matter. The whole council moved swiftly in the morning to get a death sentence from Pilate, the governor, before an uproar was made by the people. When the chief priest got to Pilate's judgment hall, they would not enter in. Now listen to this. The chief priest would not enter in to Pilate's judgment hall lest they be defiled by entering a Gentile building, so that they could eat the Passover that night, while at the same time they were plotting to kill the true Passover lamb, the Lamb of God. Pilate asked them of their accusation against him. And the weakness of their case is easily discerned in their answer. They said, well, if he were not a criminal, we would not have brought him to you. So Pilate, apparently having heard something of him, asked Jesus if he was the King of the Jews. His answer is very revealing. Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from here. Pilate finds no fault in him. So he cites a custom on the Passover that one prisoner be set free. Pilate, no doubt assuming that Jesus would be the one set free. But Pilate, you see, underestimated the hatred of these religious leaders. And they rather cried for Barabbas, a robber and a murderer, to be set free rather than Jesus. So Pilate, hoping to appease them, has him beat ruthlessly, put a crown of thorns on his head, and a purple robe. They laugh at him and mock him. Now, we may think that this is the most important day in human history, but the Roman soldiers didn't. It's another day on the job. How shall we entertain ourselves with this piece of flesh? So they made a spectacle of him. Pilate brings him back out before in the robe, and will this be enough, for the Jews? No. When the chief priests and the officers see him, they cry out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate once more enters the judgment hall and speaks to Jesus and says, "Don't you know I have the power to crucify you, the power to release you?" And once again, Jesus resets the line of authority accurately, saying, "You could have no power at all against me except that were given you from above. Therefore, he that delivered me to you has the greater sin." Pilate sought all the more after that to release him, but when he saw that he could prevail nothing, he washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it." Then all the people answered, "Let his blood be on us and on our children." And they led him away to be crucified. And he was crucified between two thieves. He was impaled through his hands and feet upon two rough beams of wood, on one vertical and one horizontal. A greater indignity could not be imagined. Totally exhausted and brutalized by the scourging, bleeding from head to foot. Those that hated him spit on him and mocked him. They that passed by reviled him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourselves. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priest, also mocking him with the scribes and elders, said, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him come down from the cross, and we will believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now, if he will have him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" Just look at this scene. Look long and deep. The one hanging up there upon the cross made the worlds. He made the hill on which his cross was planted. He created the iron ore from which the nails are fashioned that pierce his hands. He created the air that those pushed through their vocal cords to produce the words of disdain and blasphemy as they were breathing by his power. If we had been a bystander beholding this scene, we all think that we would have known, surely we would know that we were standing on hallowed ground, that we were experiencing the central event of all human history. Surely we would have known. Well, maybe not. There was nothing to tell us by sight that this was of some great importance. There was a mother there mourning. There were soldiers casting lots. There were the only earthly possessions of this condemned man. There were criminals on either side, another Roman crucifixion day, and the one in the center with a sign over his head telling his crime, as no doubt the others had. And what was it? What did it say? Guilty of robbery? Guilty of murder? Well, I'm going to leave you hanging right there because our time is out. So if you don't know the answer to that and don't know what was written on that sign, I hope you'll tune in next time and we'll find out what was written on that sign, and we'll talk some more about these wonderful events. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.